Nous sommes toujours au Festival America en compagnie de Fromm. You were a rancher, and how did you live the transition between being a rancher and becoming a writer? Wasn't it too different?
I was I got a degree in wildlife biology, and the last class I took in college was an introduction to creative writing class, and I found that writing was almost exactly like daydreaming, only more intense, and so I really liked it. But I really had spent almost my whole life outdoors, and I got a job right after school as a river ranger where I got to float the Snake River every day, and it was it was very hard to call it work. I got to play every day, but I kept writing just for fun for myself, short stories mostly, and over the next 7 years, the writing just got bigger and bigger. I would wake up to write before my shift, and I woke up earlier because I wanted to write more. Pretty soon I was waking up at 4 in the morning and writing for 3 hours and then going on the river. And when I was 30, I finally thought, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try writing full time, and I'm going to quit the ranger job. And I had enough money to not work for 2 years, and thought I'll give it a shot, and it worked. I wound up selling a book and then another book, and so I never went back to a real job again. Or as my wife says, I've never worked a day since.
Yes, you don't see it as work, you see it.
No, I can't wait to do it every day. If I'm particularly in a novel, if I'm in the middle of the story, I don't know what's going to happen next. And so if I wake up at 1:30 in the morning and if I start to think, I know I'm not going to go back to sleep. So I'll just get up and write, because it's like going to the movies. It's like, what are they going to do today? And so yeah, I've never thought of it as work at all. It's a bonus when something sells, or when a book comes out. It's just the fun was all in making it, and then I get to go to France.
And your writing is very descriptive. You pay a lot of attention to details when you describe something. Maybe does it come from the fact that you were used to spend a lot of time alone and far from everything, so you developed a different way of looking at things and situations?
The book Indian Creek is about, I spent 7 months alone in the wilderness, and what I noticed immediately when I came out was how I couldn't not, it was sort of like being crazy. I couldn't not look at motion. So, because in the mountains, I didn't put this together immediately, but in the wilderness, if something's moving, something's happening.
Okay.
So you see something and, oh, what's that? And it's a bird or a deer or a bear. And when I got back into civilization, so much motion goes around you all the time. It means nothing. But I went to a restaurant, and it was just, and,
like the wild people in the movies, you know, when they are not used to civilization.
right? Yeah, I realized that that's kind of true. But also, when you spend time, there's less stimulus sort of in the wild, so you do pay more attention to things. You have more time, more focus. And in the real world, there's just so much going on around that you just filter a lot of it out, and so you pay less attention to detail. And my wife always says, we come home from a party and I can describe what everybody looked like.
Oh, yes.
And she's like, oh, you know, that woman whose mother was from so-and-so. And I said, well, I wasn't really listening, but is that the one with the hand that's twisted? And she goes, yes. So yeah, I think you just learn without trying to, just to pick up more detail that way.
Yeah, it came naturally in the wild.
Right.
The
It
wildlife.
wasn't like I focused. I'm going to look at more detail. But then as a writer, you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like you really, what's the detail here that will put somebody else in the story?
Mm-hmm. And you don't only write nature writing, but nature, whatever your kind of your style is or the theme is very present in your writings. Do you consider it as a character, almost as a character, or as the perfect setting for your plot?
Both. Where I live, the setting, the landscape, it's like background that won't stay in the background because it's big and it's wild, and the the wide open spaces to some people are very oppressive. It's there's no limits, and they feel lost, and it can be claustrophobic, which seems strange because it's so open, but or storms can be deadly, whereas most people living in a city, they're inconvenient, and out in Montana they can kill you. It's a bigger landscape, and because of that, it is like a character. That was a good way to put it, because it's always there and you can't ignore it, and which isn't true in a lot of places. You can, and I've set stories where it's in an apartment. It doesn't really matter where it is, but once you go outside, then it becomes something real.
And how would you qualify your writing? How did you almost craft this way of writing, very poetic and descriptive at the same time? Is it looking the habit of looking and writing the way you see?
Yeah, no matter what I write, my big aim is to let someone else in so they can see what I saw. So if it's nonfiction, in Indian Creek, I want them to be able to imagine what it would be like to be this 20-year-old kid who doesn't know what he's doing, stuck out in the mountains. Or in a novel, I want them to be this woman and feel what she's going through. And the way that I've found to do that is to make it so specific that they can actually start to see what this person is seeing. And if you show enough of that, then they will start to feel what that must be like without you having to tell them. And if that works, then that's a great day writing. And what the books I read, the ones I really love are like, I am the character. You know, it's like wearing their skin, and so that's what I try to do in the writing.
And what are the books that gave you this feeling and made you feel
there's, oh boy, there's a lot. An Irish writer, Roddy Doyle, his book, it won the Booker Prize many years ago, called Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha. You're a 10-year-old in Dublin whose family is falling apart around him and he doesn't quite realize it. And it's very funny and heartbreaking, but you are that kid. You go through everything he goes through. And that's the first book that comes to mind. Remains of the Day, an English writer, this butler who is so intense on being a very good butler, he almost has no mind of his own. He's only there to serve, and you so want him to break out, but he can't. It's not. I think the writer did. It must have been so tempting for him to say, "Okay, now let him live," but he kept in that character and wouldn't let him do that because it wasn't realistic to the character.
Do you still go in the nature and for a few days, because you said you had a family life, you had wife, kids, and so on? Do you still run away and escape to watch fishes or hunting?
This new book, The Names of the Stars, is about that. I was offered a chance to go back into the wilderness to take care of more fish eggs for 1 month. And my boys at the time were 6 years old and 9 years old, and I thought that I would take them with me. And my sons were so ecstatic. They thought, well, we'll make bows and arrows, and we'll chip flints to make knives, and we'll make our clothes out of deer skins. And then it got to be, it was farther into the wilderness than I thought it was going to be. And then it was, oh, that's right when the grizzly bears come out of hibernation, and they'll be all over the place looking for anything to eat. And my wife said, "You're not taking the boys." But I went. And it was, I love it. It's very hard. It was much harder than when I was 20 and footloose. And so I missed my family incredibly, but at the same time, it was so nice to be back. And but that's a big trip out. But other than that, my boys and my wife and I float rivers and go backpacking into the mountains all the time. I've been in France for 3 days now, and 5 days ago I finished a backpacking trip with my son before he went off to college. And
Okay.
it's something I want to just go backpacking to this one lake, and so of course let's go.
Oh, it's great that
Yeah.
you have raised them up like this in this way of life, and that they enjoy and ask for it.
Right. Yes. And then my other son, who's going off to school in San Francisco, he wants to live in a big city, but he wanted to go floating the river that runs through town once more before he left. And so yeah, it's nice that you never push it on them, but they grew up with it and they've really stuck with it. Yeah, they like it.
Are you reading something at the moment? What are you reading, or what would you recommend us to read?
A book I read fairly recently is by a Tasmanian writer, Richard Flanagan. He won the Booker Prize a few years ago, and I read that book, The Narrow Road to the Far North, and thought it was fantastic. So I looked at his other books, and I went to his first novel, which is The Death of a River Guide, and I had been a river guide, so I picked that out, and it was at least as good as the one that won the Booker Prize. It's a fantastic novel. And what I'm reading right now is one of the guys who was here, Smith Henderson, a novel set in Montana. And I started reading it a month ago, got 15 pages in, and said, this one was going to hold my interest. I'm going to save it for the airplane. So I'm almost done with it, and it's quite good too.